many people, children in particular, do not realize that when you would grow up, say 100 years ago, you were expected to work. You might be working on your parents' farm, milking the cows, picking green beans, or helping the farm survive. But many people also, and many children, worked in two particular places that were known for child labor. And in Morgantown, those two arenas would have been the coal mines and the glass factories. There were 30-some glass factories, 40, that number just surfaced just recently. 40 glass factories in Morgantown, and that counted the very small ones that might have been in a garage setting to the very large glass houses that existed here for many years. Currently, we have, out of the 40 original glass production houses, we only have one left, and that's the Davis and Lynch factory that made, painted mostly glass globes for lamps. And that is a pretty awesome thing to think that there used to be 40 and now there's one. And I think they're just in partial production, as I understand it. But back in 100 years ago, up until the 1930s, when they changed the laws, children oftentimes had to go to work. And the work was not easy. You had to, say, as an example, the coal mines that existed in this area. You could have worked as a breaker boy. You could have worked as a mule and horse, what they call a driver. It was all very dirty work, and it was dangerous work. And oftentimes men and children would die in accidents from gas explosions. There was a lot of controversy about child labor in the United States as well as West Virginia. West Virginia was sort of isolated, and a lot of attention was brought to West Virginia because the two places that children tended to work for money, glass houses and coal mines, were dirty. That was dirty work, and it was dangerous work. So there was a lot of national attention brought on the fact that West Virginia had so many people and children working in those environments. If you would have worked in the coal mine 100 years ago, you would have been paid approximately 7 cents an hour for your very dirty and hard work. That's not very much money. But back in those days, people really needed the income from the children as well as the adults just to make it through and to get by. Hopefully we will not ever have to return to that type of environment. And actually, children were thought of in different ways than they are in today's world. Children were just, many people sort of thought of them as little adults, actually, just shorter. And so they were not treated in the manner that you guys are lucky to be treated in today's world. I bet none of you guys probably work, do you? Huh? No. I bet you might have to go out and pull some beans out of a garden maybe if your parents have a garden. But you wouldn't have to go to work in a coal mine where you would be very, very dirty. As you can see in these pictures, you can come up and look at them closer after I finish. But people got very dirty, and it was back-breaking work, and then you got paid very little. And as I said, many times there were gas explosions and other ways that people did get seriously injured. Sometimes it was from losing fingers inside of machinery. Wasn't always a gas explosion, but other injuries occurred in both of those environments, the glass factories and the coal mines. In the glass factories in particular, children could start working as early as 6, 7, 8 years old. And as you see, the top picture on the left there, I think that little boy was 9. And you would start working at 6, 7, 8 years old and maybe work there the rest of your life. Years ago, I did an exhibit for the what's now the Seneca Center, but at that time, years ago, it had been Seneca Glass Company. I did an exhibit back in the early 90s, and I met a gentleman, actually, that had worked there and started there as a child and had worked there 50-some years before he retired. So that was a common practice. Oftentimes in the glass factories and the coal mines, people would bring their son into work in that environment as well, so it was kind of a family thing. The pictures that you see on this board were all taken by Louis Hines, who was a very famous child labor photographer. He took pictures. He had been a school teacher originally in New York City, and he was appalled by things that he read about children working. Basically, he was very bothered by children working in environments all over the country, but he was really bothered by coal mines and glass factories and small children working in those environments. So he gave up his job as a school teacher and went to work for the government, and his job was to document child labor in primarily the glass houses and the coal mines here in this area and other parts of West Virginia. As I said a while ago, earlier, that in the 1930s, during the New Deal and the Depression era, the law was changed and they were not allowed to have young children working in those two environments. Many times before that time frame, people did try, because there was a lot of people that were organized along the lines of trying to stop child labor in dangerous environments, but weren't not able to really get anywhere with that. Because we were in an industrial mode at that time, and they needed as many workers / bodies as they could get to work in those factories and mines. Would anyone like to ask me any questions about child labor or children working in any of those environments that I mentioned? Would you guys like to know something? Excuse me.
Yeah. You said they, in the mines and stuff, they worked with mules and things. What did they do in the glass factories? What was their jobs?
They worked with molds. They pretty much learned. There was girls and boys that worked in the glass houses. Now, girls weren't allowed in the coal mines. They were considered, even later, grown women were considered to be unlucky in the coal mines. But boys and girls worked in the glass houses. They put foots on and worked with a foot machine to make foots of glasses. You can see them in the second picture down, working at the layer, which was you would put the glass in the layer to be heated up to a certain temperature. So they were doing pretty much all types of jobs. Girls primarily worked learning to do, they would probably first maybe be packing glass, and, wrapping it up and packing it. Cleaning glass, that was another chore for girls to do in glass houses. And then they would probably move up the ladder, and girls as well as young women would show a proclivity, or they were able to cut glass. They might have worked their way up into being a glass cutter. But you sort of worked your way up to being a carry boy, as they called it, where you would carry the glass around. You could be doing all types of jobs. The simplest ones would go to the children, of course. And then as you got a little older, you would do a more difficult job. Now, did someone have their hand up down here? Because I think I did see a hand down here. did you want to ask something about working in a coal mine if you're little? I will mention too, this is something that I learned in school many years ago. It was really bad here, but in the I think it was in the 1700s in England, I saw pictures of actually like 4-year-olds crawling around in holes that were not that much bigger than themselves, pulling coal out. And, you know, because there was no law against that. So we didn't have that, but what we did have was not a good situation. And as I said before, it's not something we ever want to go back to. But in other parts of the country, as I also mentioned, where agriculture was big compared to here, you would have been working on big farms or working when they brought the harvest in and things such as that. So there was different things to do, child labor related, all over the country, depending on what the industry was in that part of the country. But in Morgantown and in West Virginia, especially in Morgantown, glass houses, because there were so many of them, and coal mines, because there were quite a few coal mines, needed young workers. And so those were the two areas in Morgantown that child labor was prevalent. No other question? Oh, back there.
Yeah, my question has to do with how long a shift you might have worked.
Oh, that's a very good question, and I forgot to mention that. She likes to put her hand up. I don't blame you. Yes, it was often required that you would work 10 hours a day in a coal mine. Now, look at this poor child up here. He looks so pitiful if you come up and look later. His face looks so sad. It kills me every time I look at that. He just looks so pitiful. But you were expected to work for 10 hours a day. Can you imagine going in at 7 o'clock at night, in the morning, and then you would get finished all those hours later? They also made kids work night shifts. And they said, when they were questioned, when Lewis Hine would question this photographer that documented child labor in this country, and particularly in West Virginia, when he would ask, well, how do these kids stay awake to work all night? And they said, oh, well, the men singing keeps them awake. I'm like, oh. Oh, well, that's a terrible thing, but yeah, that's the way it was.